taken to the cleaners. When I walked into an empty house, I realized my husband already knew everything. His revenge left me devastated. The key turned in the lock with a familiar click, but the apartment beyond was eerily silent. Zolani stepped inside, dropping her purse onto the entryway table. "David," she called, though she already knew, somehow, that he wouldn't answer. The living room was tidy, the kitchen spotless. No note on the fridge, no message on his usual scrap of paper by the coffee maker. Only one thing was out of place, the dry cleaning bag draped over the dining table. Her stomach tightened as she approached. The plastic was crisp, the receipt stapled to the front. "We did our best, but the white stain on your black dress couldn't be removed. Sorry for the inconvenience." Zolani's breath caught. She unzipped the bag, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the sleek cocktail dress, the one she'd worn 2 weeks ago to the office gala. The one she'd slipped out of later that night, laughing as her coworker Mark pressed her against the hotel wall, his hands already working at the zipper. She had been careful. Or so she thought. But there it was, a faint, stubborn blotch near the hem. A ghost of her betrayal. Then she saw it. Looped over the hanger, glinting in the dim light, David's wedding ring. Her knees buckled. She sank into a chair, clutching the dress, the plastic crinkling in her grip. He knew. He must have picked up the dress from the cleaners, seen the note, and realized the truth about the stain's origin. She had hoped the cleaners could erase it. But some stains sink too deep. The apartment hummed with absence. No angry voicemails, no dramatic confrontation. Just the quiet, devastating weight of a man who had decided she wasn't worth another word. Zolani pressed the ring into her palm, the metal still warm from the hanger. Then she began to cry. The silence. Zolani's fingers flew across her phone screen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "David, please. Let me explain. Sent. It wasn't what you think. Sent. Just call me. Please. Sent." The messages glowed blue on the screen, taunting her. No delivered notification. No typing bubbles. Just silence. She dialed his number again. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail, his calm, familiar voice, the one that used to murmur "I love you" against her neck. Now it was just a recording, indifferent. "You've reached David. Leave a message." She didn't. What could she say? Her thumb hovered over Mark's contact. She could call him, demand to know if he'd said something, if he'd been careless. But then she remembered the way he'd smirked the next morning, like they'd shared a secret. Like he'd won. She threw her phone onto the couch. It bounced, landing face up, still blank. No response. The apartment felt like a museum of their life together, the framed photo from their honeymoon in Greece, the coffee mug he always used, the indentation on the couch where he'd sit to read. All of it untouched. All of it accusing her. She grabbed her keys and ran out the door, not even sure where she was going. Maybe his office. Maybe his brother's place. But as she stepped into the elevator, her reflection in the mirrored walls stopped her. Pale. Wild-eyed. A woman unraveling. The doors slid shut. And still, her phone didn't ring.
The reckoning. Mark adjusted his cufflinks in the gala bathroom mirror, his reflection sharp under the sterile light. The hum of chatter and clinking glasses bled through the door. Tonight was the firm's anniversary party, a room full of people who had no idea who he really was. Zolani's people. His fingers stilled on his sleeve. It had taken years to get here. Years of rebuilding after David, clueless, lucky David, had stumbled into the middle of Mark's carefully orchestrated investment scam. One offhand comment from David to the wrong person, and the whole scheme collapsed. Mark lost everything. His money. His reputation. his freedom for a time. But patience was a weapon. He'd chosen the name Mark Ellis carefully, built a new identity, piece by piece. And when he'd seen the job posting at Zolani's firm, he'd known fate was handing him the perfect revenge. David's wife. She'd been easy to charm, flirtatious laughs in the break room, lingering glances after meetings. He'd studied her, learned her boredom, her quiet resentment of David's late nights at work. And tonight, he'd exploit it. Mark slipped his phone from his pocket and opened the Notes app. A single line stood out, "Leave proof." He smirked. The black dress Zolani was wearing, sleek, expensive, would show stains very clearly. And David? Meticulous, observant David would notice. The bathroom door swung open, and Mark schooled his face into smooth indifference as a colleague walked in. "You coming back out, Ellis?" "They're about to toast." Mark pocketed his phone. "Wouldn't miss it." Out in the ballroom, Zolani stood near the bar, her fingers tapping restlessly against her champagne flute. "Right on schedule." He approached, letting his hand brush the small of her back as he leaned in. "You look incredible." She flushed, just like he knew she would. By midnight, she'd be in his hotel room. By morning, David would find the dress. And by the time the sun set again, Mark would be watching from the shadows as David's marriage shattered, just like his life had, years ago. Finally, he thought, clinking his glass against Zolani's. Payback. The game continues. Mark strode into the office on Monday morning, his mind already spinning with possibilities. If David hadn't confronted Zolani, then the plan wasn't complete. He needed to see the fallout, the devastation, otherwise, what was the point? And then he saw her. Zolani stood by the coffee machine, her posture relaxed, her lips curved in an easy smile as she chatted with a colleague. No shadows under her eyes. No tension in her shoulders. Nothing to suggest her world had imploded over the weekend. What the hell? Mark forced his expression into something neutral as he approached. "Morning, Zolani. Good weekend?" She turned to him, her gaze steady, almost amused. "Oh, you know. Quiet." She took a slow sip of coffee, her eyes never leaving his. "Yours?" A flicker of unease prickled at the back of his neck. There was something in her tone, something knowing. Had she figured him out? No. Impossible. He played along, flashing her a practiced grin. Nothing exciting. Just some errands. She hummed, tilting her head. Well, sometimes the quiet weekends are the best. Then she walked away, leaving him standing there, coffee untouched, mind racing. By lunch, Mark's frustration had sharpened into something hotter, more urgent. He'd planned this. Calculated every move. David was supposed to find that dress, see the stain, put the pieces together. But instead, Zolani was acting like nothing had happened. Had she hidden it? Sent it to the cleaners before David could see? He gritted his teeth. Fine. If David hadn't discovered the truth on his own, Mark would make sure he did. He pulled out his phone and opened a secure email account he'd set up months ago, just for this. Anonymous. Untraceable. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could send David a message. A photo, maybe. Or just a hint, check the dry cleaning receipt. But no. Too soon. Patience had gotten him this far. He'd wait. Watch. See if Zolani slipped up. And if she didn't? Well, there were other ways to make sure David knew exactly what his wife had done. Mark slipped his phone back into his pocket and smiled. The game wasn't over yet.
The revelation. The dry cleaner's bell jingled as David stepped inside, the faint chemical scent of pressed wool and starch hanging in the air. He hadn't planned on picking up Zolani's dress. She usually handled her own dry cleaning, but when they'd called him instead of her, something uneasy had settled in his gut. "I'm here for the Delaney order," he said, sliding the claim ticket across the counter. The woman, Marta, according to her name tag, nodded and disappeared into the back. When she returned, she held the black cocktail dress carefully in its plastic sheath, her expression pinched with disapproval. She handed it over along with the receipt, stapled as always. "We did our best, but the white stain on your black dress couldn't be removed. Sorry for the inconvenience." David's fingers tightened around the hanger. "A stain?" Before he could ask, Marta clucked her tongue. "Sir, I don't mean to overstep," she said, her voice low, as if sharing womanly wisdom, "but next time? When your wife looks so beautiful in her expensive dress, and you get excited," she gestured vaguely. "Take the extra moment to remove it completely. These fabrics are delicate. Stains like this don't come out." David stared at her. Then, inexplicably, he smiled. Not because it was funny, but because he knew, with a cold, certain clarity, that he wasn't the one who had left that stain. He hadn't been at the gala. He hadn't seen Zolani in that dress at all that night. And yet here it was. Proof. "Thanks for the advice," he said, his voice eerily calm as he took the dress. The wedding ring in his pocket, the one he'd slipped off after leaving the dry cleaners, the one he'd known he wouldn't need anymore, felt heavy as lead. He walked out into the sunlight, the plastic bag whispering against his leg. Somewhere out there, someone had touched his wife. And somewhere out there, they had no idea what was coming. The unraveling. David sat in his car outside the dry cleaners, the plastic-wrapped dress lying across the passenger seat like an accusation. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, pausing at a name he hadn't dialed in years. Ethan Cole. Ethan had been his college roommate, and now he was the head of IT at Zolani's firm. They hadn't spoken much since David's wedding, but some friendships didn't need upkeep, they just were. Ethan picked up on the second ring. "David? Holy shit, man, it's been..." "I need a favor," David interrupted, his voice low. "And I need you to keep it quiet." A beat of silence. Then, cautious, "What's going on?" 2 hours later, David sat across from Ethan in a dim corner of a bar miles from Zolani's office. Ethan slid a manila folder across the table. "You were right," Ethan muttered, glancing around before leaning in. "There's a guy, Mark Ellis, who's been sniffing around Zolani for months. Always, coincidentally, at her desk, lingering after meetings. I pulled his badge logs. He's been accessing files he shouldn't, including yours." David's fingers tightened around his glass. "Why?" Ethan exhaled. "That's the fucked up part." I dug deeper, ran his photo through facial rec. His real name isn't Mark Ellis. It's Daniel Voss. The name hit David like a punch. Voss. The man behind the Ponzi scheme that had collapsed 5 years ago. The one David had unwittingly exposed when he'd mentioned an odd transaction to a client who turned out to be SEC. Voss had vanished after that, his empire crumbling. And now he was back. With Zolani. With him. David's mouth curled into something too sharp to be a smile. Voss had planned this. Had used Zolani to get to him. But Voss had made one mistake. He'd underestimated just how far David would go to protect what was his. David closed the folder. "Thanks, Ethan." Ethan frowned. "What are you gonna do?" David stood, tossing cash onto the table. "Finish what he started. The chessboard. Monday, the paper trail." David sat in his home office, the glow of his laptop illuminating the sharp angles of his face. Ethan had sent him encrypted files, Mark Ellis's real employment records, badge swipes, even flagged emails. The man was meticulous, but not perfect. A pattern emerged. Mark had been siphoning small amounts from client accounts, funneling them through shell companies. A scam, just like before, but quieter this time. Contained. David copied everything. Then he called his accountant. "I need to separate my assets from Zolani's. Today." Tuesday, the lawyer. Martin Reeves had handled David's prenup. Now, he flipped through the document with a practiced eye. Infidelity clause is clear, Martin said. If you can prove she cheated, she walks away with nothing but her personal accounts. He glanced up. You have proof? David slid a photo across the table, Zolani, laughing, Mark's hand on her lower back at the gala. Getting more. Wednesday, The Watcher. The private investigator was a compact woman named Naomi with a voice like gravel and eyes that missed nothing. You want dirt on the wife and the boyfriend? She asked, sipping black coffee. I want to know everything he's doing. And I want to know if she's involved. Naomi smirked. Give me 48 hours. Thursday, The Money. David's phone buzzed, Ethan. Mark's moving bigger sums. Found a shell named Blackthorn Holdings. Sound familiar? David's blood went cold. Blackthorn was one of his old clients. The one whose tip had sunk Vasa's scam years ago. This wasn't just revenge. It was a trap. Friday, The Proof. Naomi's file was brutal. Photos of Zolani entering Mark's apartment. Bank transfers from Mark's shell companies to an offshore account in her name. And the kicker, a recording of Mark whispering, once David's broke, we disappear. Zolani's laugh in response. You're terrible. David closed the file. Checkmate. Saturday, The Endgame. David stood in the empty apartment, his bags packed. The divorce papers were on the table. The SEC tip was anonymous. And the ring? Left exactly where she'd find it. Some stains never came out. But they could sure as hell burn everything down.
The stain that remains. Zolani stood alone in the apartment, the black dress limp in her hands, David's wedding ring cold against her palm. The silence was suffocating. She had expected anger. A fight. A chance to explain. But this was annihilation. A memory sliced through her, Monday night, just over a week after the gala, her fingers digging into Mark's arm as she whispered, "Take me home with you. I can't stand being here." She had gone to him like a woman starving. And then again on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, each time more reckless, more desperate. She had even joked about leaving David. What if I just never go back? She'd murmured against Mark's skin, half laughing. He'd smirked, tracing her spine. Then we'd better make sure you're taken care of, wouldn't we? That was when he told her about the offshore account. A safety net. A way to hide money before David could freeze her out. She'd done it without hesitation. Now, the dress trembled in her grip. David knew. And worse, he had proof. She lunged for her phone, pulling up the offshore account. Balance, $0. Her breath stopped. A notification blinked, an email from the bank. Account closed at request of joint signatory. Joint signatory. Mark. Her stomach dropped. She dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. Again. Again. Nothing. The apartment walls pressed in. David was gone. Mark was gone. And the only thing left was the stain on the dress, the one that wouldn't wash out. Just like the truth.
Final reckoning. 6 months later. The news broke on a Tuesday. Mark Ellis, real name Daniel Voss, was arrested at JFK, boarding a flight to Buenos Aires with a briefcase full of forged documents and $2.3 million in embezzled funds. The SEC had been tracking him for months, tipped off by an anonymous source. Zolani's name surfaced within hours. The offshore account, the transfers, the emails, once David's broke, we disappear. It was all there. She was arrested at her mother's house, still wearing the same stunned expression she'd had the night David left. 1 year later. The prison visiting room was stark, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Zolani looked hollowed out in her jumpsuit, her once glossy hair pulled into a limp ponytail. When David walked in, her breath hitched. "You came," she whispered. He sat across from her, calm, untouchable. I wanted to see how the story ended. Her fingers clenched. You set me up. No, David said. You did that yourself. She flinched. Zolani's voice cracked as she gripped the edge of the metal table between them. David, please, just listen to me. It was a mistake. One terrible, stupid mistake. I was drunk, I was flattered, David didn't move. His expression was as steady as stone. You were sober when you opened the offshore account. She flinched. I was scared, she whispered. I panicked. I thought if you found out, you'd destroy me. A flicker of something, dark amusement, passed through his eyes. You were right. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. He just let her touch linger there, cold and unreturned. I'll do anything, she begged. Therapy. Transparency. I'll. Anything. Just one chance. Please, David, can't you give me just one chance after I get out of here? Zolani. His voice was quiet. Final. You already used your one chance. She froze. What? Years ago. That intern at the Christmas party. The one who you let kiss you in the hallway. Her stomach dropped. She remembered, the way she'd laughed it off, called it nothing, swore it meant nothing. You knew? How drunk were you that night? You came home and told me about it yourself, he said. That was your chance. And you used it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I decided then, he continued, that if you ever betrayed me again, that was it. No second chances. No fights. Just, done. She stared at him, tears spilling over. You never said. I shouldn't have had to. He stood, sliding his hands into his pockets. The ring she'd once slipped onto his finger was long gone. Goodbye, Zolani. And then he walked out, leaving her with nothing but the cold concrete floor, colder steel of the table she sat frozen at, and the icy trail left by the tears streaking down her cheek. He vanished, leaving her with nothing but the echo of his footsteps. 3 years later. The divorce was finalized through the attorneys. David didn't attend the hearing. By then, he was already in Singapore, overseeing the new Asia-Pacific branch of his company. The office was sleek, all glass and ocean views. And then there was her. Lena. A corporate lawyer with a sharp mind and a quiet laugh. She didn't play games. Didn't leave stains. They married on a beach at sunset, no drama, no secrets. 5 years later. Their daughter was born in spring. David held her for the first time, her tiny fingers curling around his, and felt something settle inside him, something he hadn't realized was broken. Lena smiled up at him from the hospital bed. She has your eyes. Peace. That was the word for it. Somewhere, Zolani was still serving her sentence. Somewhere, Mark was rotting in a federal prison. And David? He was free. Thank you for staying to the end. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and commenting your thoughts below.